Vítám vás u dalšího dílu podcastu Insider. Moje jméno je Michal Půr a se mnou je tady i můj kolega Tomáš Jirsa.
Dobrý den.
Ještě než začneme, máme tady pár obvyklých vzkazů od Tomáše.
Rádi bychom poděkovali našim skvělým partnerům za jejich trvalou podporu. Advokátní kancelář ROWAN LEGAL, která se dlouhodobě zabývá digitalizací a e-governmentem. Partnerem našeho pitného režimu je společnost KENS.
Chceme zároveň poděkovat všem, kdo nás pravidelně poslouchají a podporují. Pokud chcete slyšet celý díl, přeplaťte si ho třeba na platformě Patreon, konkrétně na adrese patreon.com/ to je takový to lomítko, Insider Podcast. Odkaz najdete v popisku pod videem a teď už jdeme na to, koho jsme si pozvali.
Naším hostem je náš starý známý britský přítel Matt Goodwin. Je to autor několika bestsellerů, je to profesor na School of Politics and International Relations University of Kent. Má poměrně hodně odebíraný Substack, kde vlastně nám konkuruje našemu Insider newsletteru, ale my ho rádi doporučíme, že je fakt skvělej, pokud se chcete rozvědět o Británii, Evropě a dalších souvislostech. A probereme s tím hodně věcí, ale teď teda přejdeme do angličtiny. Hi Matt.
Hi, how are you doing?
Nice to see you again.
Yep, nice to be back. I love the Czech Republic.
Why?
I used to live here.
For how
Yeah,
long?
I lived in Olomouc. I went to Palacký University.
You told us. Yeah.
You told us last
year.
time.
I
have very fond memories,
Wow.
and I think the Czechs are very proud of their culture and their history. So I'm down with that.
Do you have any explanation? Because I feel there is some shared part of national identity between Czechs and the Brits. I don't know why, but it's even in a way how Brexit was mourned in the Czech Republic and with the shared the area of history during the World War. There's some special connection.
I think there is. Yeah, I think there's also been a lot of prominent Brits who have spent a lot of time in the Czech Republic over the years, helping cultivate the intellectual networks. I think about Roger Scruton, for example, is the obvious one. But I remember coming over in 2001. I was one of the first waves of EU students coming over to the Czech Republic when the EU was throwing money at students to go and do Erasmus. And we have many fond memories of Olomouc. I'm not sure Olomouc has fond memories of us, but it was great. Yeah,
I was there 2 days ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's still beautiful, and it was a little bit sleepy.
Okay, well, maybe I need to go back there, liven it up.
Yeah.
So can you start us off with some kind of helicopter view into what the hell is going on in British politics basically a week before the election?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is if we take a global view for a minute, I think what's clear is Europe is moving right. I suspect America will move right in the autumn. Let's see. I suspect Trump will end up returning to the White House. And Britain is going left. So when we have this big 24 general election, all of the polls, all of the forecasts suggest we are on course for one of the biggest Labour majorities in history. And we are going to see the worst performance, according to the opinion polls, for the Conservative Party, the party of Boris Johnson, of Liz Truss, of Rishi Sunak, in history. Currently, they are forecast to collapse to the lowest number of seats ever. And then thirdly, we're seeing the return, the re-rise of chief Brexiteer Nigel Farage and his new party, the Reform Party. Of course, he previously had the Brexit Party and then he had the UK Independence Party. And Nigel Farage trying for the 8th time to win election to Parliament. So in a nutshell, one line, Britain's about to go left, the Conservatives are about to collapse, and populism is back.
Are we seeing the real-time destruction of the Tory party?
We're seeing the strange death of conservatism, or a model of conservatism. What I think is important to note is, this is a conservative movement that's been in power for 14 years. I think there are parallels to the Czech situation, by the way.
A little bit.
Well, we've had a Conservative Party in office for 14 years that has fundamentally lost touch with the people who voted for it. Brexit brought that party a unique coalition of working class voters, people who hadn't gone to university, older voters, cultural conservatives who supported Brexit, and they wanted to lower immigration into Britain. That was the Boris Johnson promise. A few years after Brexit, he said, I will get Brexit done, I will lower migration, I will control the borders, I will put Britain first. What then happened after 2019, as we went through COVID and war in Ukraine and so on, is Boris Johnson did the opposite of what he promised. He put mass immigration on steroids. He lost control of the borders. Woke ideology went crazy in the institutions, in schools, universities. And all of those people who voted for Johnson at the last election in 2019 have left the Conservatives. To give you one statistic, we're on the eve of the election now as we're talking. Only 37% of the people who voted for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives at the last election are planning to vote Conservative at this election. So what I'm saying to you is the British Tories have gone from giving the world a masterclass in how to realign and win an election with a whole new following, and then only 5 years later to completely implode and give the world a textbook in how to lose that support.
That from the Czech point of view, it's a little bit funny, because when you say it's the worst result for Tories, it means it's the worst result for Tories in 300 years. That's unbelievable. In Czech Republic, it's really unbelievable. But is there any chance that Boris Johnson will come back?
Well, the first thing to say is Boris Johnson likes to be at the center of attention. So I suspect at some point he will try something. But Boris Johnson is not going to save the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson has lost pretty much all of the support he had in British politics, both within the Conservative Parliamentary Party, who were always suspicious that Johnson was incompetent and then had that confirmed when he was in office. But then he's also lost the support of all those voters who took a punt on Boris Johnson. And look, if you talk to some of those voters today, right, this is a visceral, palpable thing. They don't just dislike the Tories, they hate the Tories. They feel that the Tories have betrayed the British people, that they were promised all of these things, and the Conservative Party in the end did what the Conservative Party tends to do, which is look after itself and say to hell with the rest of the country. So I don't think Boris Johnson can save the Conservative Party. I think this is a party that philosophically, ideologically, electorally is completely lost. It doesn't know what it is anymore. It doesn't know who's voting for it. It doesn't know what it should say to the country. It doesn't know who should lead it after this election defeat. All it knows is that once again, nearly a decade on from Brexit, it's being outflanked by Nigel Farage. And so here we are, in a way, nearly 10 years on, we haven't really solved anything. We might have left the European Union, but our politics is chaotic, is volatile, is polarized. Farage is back. The Conservatives are imploding, and we're now heading into a civil war over the future of conservatism. Do you want liberal, Tory, elite, patrician conservatism? Or do you want national, patriotic, low migration, small state, low tax conservatism? And those two wings are going to really go to war over the next 6 months.
When we talked last time, and I think it was over a year ago, your last time here, I think so, you were describing how very power efficient and ruthless can the Conservative Party be in shifting leadership, in shifting ideas and kind of reinventing itself. But it seems that this last year, it's getting completely out of touch. And when you watch, and I'm formerly a marketer, and when I see campaigns of Nigel Farage and Rishi Sunak, it's so strikingly unauthentic what Rishi Sunak does. He just seems like a corporate clerk trying to be cool.
He's a technocrat.
Yeah.
He's a technocrat.
So what happened with the ruthless leadership of a party that would otherwise slash Sunak and try somebody else and do anything to politically survive? Because it seems it's suicidal at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, firstly on Rishi Sunak, here's something every Czech listening needs to know. Rishi Sunak had no mandate. You have to remember this. He was not elected by the voters. He was not elected by Conservative members. So what happened is Boris Johnson won a mandate from Conservative Party members in a leadership election. He was then deposed by Conservative Tory elites because they didn't like Boris Johnson and they were then influenced by the Partygate scandal. Liz Truss then won a mandate to become the leader of the Conservative Party. Now, whatever you think about Liz Truss, she then tried to do something radical by cutting taxes, pushing back the state, trying to find a way to growth, right? Well, the Tory elites didn't like that either. So they deposed Liz Truss, right? And she was gone. Then they appointed Rishi Sunak. And what they said at the time was that the adults are back in charge. Boris Johnson was a child. Liz Truss was a child.
And he lost to Truss.
Rishi Sunak, who had been defeated by Liz Truss, was now back in charge. The adults were back in charge. Okay. So all of the Tory elites in London said, we're back in charge. Thank goodness. Power is back. We're back in charge. Now, of course, what we've then seen since Rishi Sunak was installed is the collapse, the complete collapse of the Conservative Party's support. Because what Tory elites have not understood, for them, that was a ruthless move for renewal. Rishi Sunak was partly about a return to managerialism, a return to technocracy, a return to Tory elites. But what then happened is you quickly realized Rishi Sunak had no vision, no idea, no program for the country. So you would think after all of that effort of Rishi Sunak working to destroy Boris Johnson, to destroy Liz Truss, to get appointed, you would think he'd have something to do. But what he did is he said, okay, I want to ban smoking. That was one of his big policies. I want to reform exams for school children. I want to stop a high-speed rail line. And that's basically it. That was the Sunak vision. So what was it for? What was all of this for? Right? And what it was for was to put somebody into office who's managerial, who's a technocrat, who's part of the global elite. He was a former banker. He spent time in America. The rumor is he's already got his children registered in a school in California for next year. He's already assumed that he's going to lose this election. And the worst bit about Rishi Sunak is when we had our D-Day anniversary, the 80th year of D-Day, which for Brits, and for everybody really in Europe, this is an incredibly important moment. It's a symbolic moment, existential moment. Rishi Sunak went for the morning and then left early. And what that did during the election campaign, what that did is it made a lot of British people ask themselves a very deep question, which is, does this guy even believe in Britain? Does he really believe in the country? Or is he just part of this amorphous, international, global, jet-setting elite class that don't really care about our national history and our values? And of course, for Nigel Farage, who is completely, Nigel, who I know very well, he's obsessed with military history. He's obsessed with the Second World War. He goes to battlefields on his holidays. He is Mr. World War II, okay? But for him, he was absolutely outraged that Sunak had left the anniversary early. And it was at that moment in the polls, you saw the Conservatives go even lower to 18, 19%. Never seen that before. And Farage then becomes much more popular.
How much of Rishi Sunak's inability for action, for political program, is caused by him not having any content, which I think is strange after so many years in the Tory party. And because we see a similar situation in the Czech Republic where we have supposedly conservative prime minister, the ODS guy Petr Fiala, but the government is unable to do much because the coalition is so broad. So my question is, with the Tory majority, how willing would they be, all the numbers, to go for some kind of radical reform agenda, or is the party already, somewhere else ideologically?
Well, remember, the British Conservative Party in 2019 won the biggest majority any Conservative Party has had since the days of Margaret Thatcher. They had an 80-seat majority with Boris Johnson. They could have done anything they wanted to do, okay? And we need to be clear about this point. They could have reformed the institutions. They could have overturned Tony Blair's legislation. They could have left the European Convention on Human Rights. They could have done whatever they needed to do to stop the small boats and the illegal migration crisis on the border. They could have dramatically lowered migration and had a genuinely high-skill policy, which is what Boris Johnson promised. They could have leveled up the left-behind regions. They could have completely changed the way we run our National Health Service. They could have prioritized British people and British families in the housing crisis. They could have basically overseen a revolution if they had wanted to. If they had wanted to. And the key point is the British Tories, when they won the 80-seat majority, they didn't know what to do with that power because philosophically, ideologically, they don't really know who they are anymore. They don't have a unifying ideology anymore, right? This isn't like Margaret Thatcher, who was genuinely a revolutionary. I mean, she had a very good, high-quality number of people around her who said, okay, we have a different theory of the economy. We have a different theory of inflation. We have a different theory of geopolitics. We're going to use power to push a lot of this through. When Johnson came in, everybody who's worked with him has said the same thing. He didn't know what he wanted to do with power. He had no real idea. It wasn't really until the war in Ukraine that suddenly he found something that he was passionate about doing. And so out of this 80-seat majority was just an enormous waste. And so now the British Tories have become pathetic because in the UK, every morning you wake up and they say, please, please, don't give Labour a big majority. Please, don't give Labour a super majority. We'll change things. We'll stop immigration. We'll stop the small boats. We'll change things. And voters are saying, you've had 14 years. 14 years and an 80-seat majority. Why on earth would we trust you to do anything differently? So what you're going to see at this election, if the polls are right, because we're either heading into a massive Labour majority or the biggest crisis in the polling industry in the history of the polling industry. But what you're going to see as well, is, if they're right, a generation of Conservatives losing their seats. Maybe even some of the frontline Conservatives, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Penny Mordaunt, potentially Rishi Sunak, who knows. But if the polls are right, we're about to see a whole generation of Conservatives be thrown out of the House of Commons. That's the point where maybe the Tories need to say, okay, who are we? What is our renewal? What is our ideology? Because if they don't have an answer to that, Nigel Farage has now put out his manifesto. And you can say what you want about Nigel Farage. I suspect in Czech Republic, people think, okay, he's funny, he's a bit of a joke, he's not serious. I'll tell you something, that manifesto that he put out is a serious document. He has a very clear idea about what he wants to do in Britain. End mass migration, stop the boats, eliminate woke ideology from the institutions, prioritize British people in the housing crisis, reform public services, all the things that the Tories are not able to commit to because they're dominated by liberal Tories. They're not actually conservative anymore. They're liberal, they're sort of liberal wet moderates who are basically indistinguishable from Labour and the Lib Dems on a lot of these cultural questions. And so that's where Farage is getting his strength from now, because he's saying, look, there's a new post-Brexit consensus in British politics.
Děkujeme, že jste doposlouchali až sem. Pokud chcete slyšet víc, celý díl najdete na adrese patreon.com/Insider Podcast. Odkaz najdete v popisku hned pod videem.
A co jsme v dnešním Insideru řešili dále? Podívejte se.
Stop the boats, end mass migration. The radical left are the worst at all of this. The average member of parliament in Britain is not very clever. Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer.
Is this kind of like a human resources crisis of the traditional political parties?
Does this guy even believe in Britain? Step 1 in the Farage revolt is smash the Tories. Step 2, how do I become Prime Minister?
Get a grip. You're the Prime Minister, for God's sake.
Europe is moving. America will move right in the autumn. Trump will end up returning to the White House. And Britain is going left. Farage is based. 0 fucks given.